Welcome back to part 2 of the study of the word lexicon. Enjoy, comment, and subscribe.
Okay. And for bilinguals.
The general view is they have separate but interconnected lexicons for each language. And neurologically, there's even some evidence that nouns and verbs might be processed or stored in slightly different brain areas.
Incredible complexity. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. How language shapes thought, framing. That Reed College excerpt was really eye-opening. What exactly is framing?
Framing is essentially about how the specific language choices we make influence how people think, feel, and act about something. And the key point is it's unavoidable.
Unavoidable. How so?
Because anytime you communicate, you have to choose certain words, certain structures. You can't present information without putting it in some kind of frame. It's intrinsic to language use.
Right. The examples they gave were stark, calling the January 6th events an insurrection versus legitimate political discourse.
Exactly. Those frames evoke completely different emotional and cognitive responses. Same with right to choose versus murder of unborn children regarding abortion. The language shapes the entire debate.
And metaphors play a big role too, like war metaphors.
Calling something a war on drugs or a battle against cancer frames it as an urgent conflict requiring aggressive action. It's not a neutral description.
It definitely changes the feeling. And this connects to our existing knowledge structures, right? Cognitive frames.
Yes. We have these mental templates, like a script for going to a restaurant. Language activates these frames. And then there are semantic frames, the networks of concepts linked to specific words, like everything connected to the word marriage.
And all this leads to framing effects, how the language choice affects our response?
Precisely, like the battle against cancer versus journey with cancer example. Same situation, different frame, potentially different emotional response and approach.
The subtlety can be amazing. I was struck by that Stanford research on girls are as good as boys at math. Just the sentence structure implying math is naturally for boys.
It's incredibly subtle, isn't it? It shows how grammar itself can carry these hidden implications and reinforce biases.
Wow. And does language actually affect memory, like the eyewitness testimony thing?
Well, the research on verb intensity in eyewitness reports has had some replication issues, so that's debated. But other classic studies, like the one where people were shown ambiguous drawings with different labels.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
People's memory of the drawing shifted to match the label they were given. So language can definitely interfere with or reshape visual recall.
So how does framing actually work? The excerpt mentioned cognitive, social pragmatic, and emotional mechanisms.
Right. So cognitive is about activating those knowledge structures, those schemas, like the restaurant example. Social pragmatic is about the inferences we make about the speaker based on their language.
Like judging someone using overly complex words.
Exactly. Or inferring intention. And emotional mechanisms are about how words trigger feelings, general positive negative valence, like illegal aliens versus non-citizens, or specific emotions like anger or enthusiasm, which then influence our judgment.
It's a multi-layered process. The excerpt listed different types of framing too. Lexical, grammatical.
Yes. Lexical is the choice of specific words or labels, like victim framing. Grammatical is about sentence structure, tense, aspect like saying be a voter versus just vote, which could apparently increase participation.
Interesting. And generic framing.
That's using broad generalizations, like X group or Y, which can promote essentialist thinking, seeing groups as having fixed inherent traits.
And what was that about a foreign language effect?
That's the idea that these framing effects might be weaker when we process information in a non-native language.
Why would that be?
Possibly because there's less immediate emotional resonance, or maybe we engage more deliberate analytical thinking when using a second language. It kind of dials down the automatic emotional response.
This is all fascinating stuff. Now, just to clarify something we touched on earlier, lexicon versus vocabulary. They're related but distinct.
Exactly. Think of the lexicon as the entire potential inventory of words and meaningful parts in a whole language. Its structure, meanings, grammar rules. It's the big system.
Okay, the whole toolbox.
Right. And your vocabulary is your personal set of tools from that toolbox, the words you actually know and use. It's a subset of the lexicon.
Got it. Lexicon is the language's potential. Vocabulary is the individual's actual usage. And the lexicon itself changes.
Constantly. Languages are living things. Lexicons change mainly through borrowing words from other languages.
Like English borrowing from French and Latin.
Tons of borrowing, yes. Also, creating new words, compounding, adding prefixes, suffixes, and semantic change, where word meanings shift over time, which we saw ties into framing as well.
And this borrowing can make historical linguistics tricky?
It can, yeah. If a borrowed word replaces an original native word, it can obscure the historical connections linguists are trying to trace back to proto-languages.
Makes sense. And new words popping up all the time. Neologisms, where do they come from?
All over. Slang is a huge source. Advertising, sometimes even kids' mistakes stick around, though that's rare. Plus the more regular processes like morphology, adding bits to words, and compounding. And borrowing, of course.
What's a real mix of formal and informal processes?
Definitely. And Wikipedia even broke down types of borrowing, like loanwords versus phonosemantic matching, which is more about matching sound and meaning.
It's amazing how dynamic it all is. And the ancient Greeks were thinking about this stuff too. Lexicography.
They were. People like Herennius Philo, Phrynicus, Morris, they were defining words, trying to sort out similar terms, and some were very focused on preserving what they saw as correct, Attic Greek versus the common Koine Greek. Shows this fascination with words isn't new.
Prescriptivism even back then. And finally, why does language change at all? The Ask Linguistics thread mentions social factors.
Right. Individuals innovate, maybe, but changes really stick when a whole community adopts them. Social dynamics are key. And English, being Germanic but massively influenced by Norman French, is just a prime example of how contact and history reshape a language's lexicon through borrowing.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground here, a real deep dive into words.
That you certainly have.
So just to recap the big takeaways, we saw there are compelling reasons to build your vocabulary, way beyond just sounding smart. It affects perception, understanding, even social change.
And there are tons of ways to do it, from just reading more diversely to using specific techniques like semantic reasoning or just simple daily word apps. Find what works for you.
And understanding our mental lexicon, that internal web of words. It's not alphabetical. It's this dynamic network of sound and meaning connections.
Which explains things like priming and slips of the tongue. It's a fascinatingly complex system.
And maybe the biggest one, the power of framing. How the words we choose, even subtly, shape how we and others think, feel, and remember.
Absolutely. And I think that's the real aha moment for you listening. Once you're aware of these mechanisms of vocabulary building, the mental lexicon, framing, you're empowered.
How so?
Well, you can be more intentional in your own communication, choose words more precisely. And you become a sharper listener or reader, better able to spot how language is being used to influence you, to see the frames.
Right. So whether you're prepping for something important, learning something new, or just curious, understanding this stuff helps you engage with information more critically, articulate your ideas better, and ultimately connect more effectively.
So here's a final thought to chew on. Given how powerfully language shapes our perceptions, even our memories, what if you consciously tried to reframe how you talk and think about a challenge you're facing right now?
Like a problem at work or a personal goal.
Exactly. Could deliberately changing the language you use around it, the frame, actually unlock new ways of seeing it, new solutions you hadn't considered before?
That's actually a really interesting challenge, something to actively try.
Something to consider as you continue learning.
A great thought to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.